The other one. Come on. Here. No, it's not. Yeah, it shows, but it's a different setting. I can't see it on my. Okay, here we go. Okay. Using slideshow. It doesn't show me the proper thing on the computer now. Okay, are you still there? You still see me? I muted them so they can't. And it's recording. So let's do it that way. If you could turn off the lights and I'll find my way around. It's not going to be the same thing. No, I know. Thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned, it was really a challenge for me to be able to find all the information and correct information. It also just proves the problems that we have with the way we look at Africa and the way Africa is studied, and we'll talk about it in a minute. So first, before we go further, I want to set this very clear. Nowadays, and to avoid frictions between religions and so on, and people that are different religion or have no religion, the BC, that used to be the before Christ, is been changing BCE, which is before Common Era. The CE replaced the AD. And then you will see from time to time BP, which means before present. So it's before 2023. So these are three of the dating abbreviation. First, the map. This is the map of Africa nowadays with a few solid lines where there should be dotted lines because there are places that are in dispute right now and that you cannot really, I mean, we can't take part, if you want, of what is happening. So for example, what we'll see today, and gosh, it's in the news every day, it's Sudan, Ethiopia, a little bit of Eritrea, but not that much. And then you have the Somalia, the small part of Somalia and the larger part of Somalia. It will peek into Kenya and Tanzania just very briefly, and we'll explain why. So this is the map of Africa prior to colonization. And this is an important point because for me, I was thinking, when you think that whole continent, except for the north, and of course, in my disclaimer will come that we won't talk about the Mediterranean littoral because of all the different cultures that it was impacted by, that makes it completely different. We won't talk about Egypt either. So we will start with Nubia, which is nowadays Sudan. But when you look at this map compared to the one we saw before, I think the big difference is we have no borders. These are regions, whereas the post-colonial period is all made of borders and distinct countries, which is for many of these countries completely irrational because it's still a tribal culture. And tribals go beyond borders. We have to realize that at that time, population were nomads, most of them, and were moving from one side to the other. And so you had cultural centers, but that had very, I mean, the borders were up to where they wanted to cultivate or where they wanted to raise their cattle. That was the idea of borders. This is the way Europe started too. And it's sometimes a difficult thing to imagine, but this is how Africa was before. So when you can see, we'll talk about the kingdom of Aksum. As I say, we won't talk about Egypt, but we will talk about Nubia, which had brought things to Egypt and was impacted by, of course, the incredible civilization of Egypt. But then you see all kind of little empires that came at different times. And this will be the next part of our expose in July. It's going to be the western part of Africa. Very interesting too, by the way. Very important point is, sorry, one is not showing, of course. Why am I having problem with that one? It should go. Trying to show so very important point is the Berlin Conference in 1884-85 that regulated the European colonization and trade in Africa during the new imperialism period. It was organized by Otto von Bismarck, but at also the request of the King of Belgium, of the Belgians, not the Belgian, Leopold II, who was, as you know, very instrumental in bringing Congo as a colony for Belgium. And this was really what happened is you had all these countries that were at that conference that wanted to set up once for all their dominance over the entire Africa with a few exceptions. So that's why it's been called the old carve-up of Africa. Though there had been agreements before and there will be later, but this is the main conference that decided on that. Now, of the 14 countries that were represented, 7 of them, and it's quite interesting, Austria, Hungary, Russia, Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Norway, the Ottoman Empire, the United States came out without any formal possession in Africa. Mm-hmm. It's moving there. So this is the result of that conference, and you can see, and I think with the colors, it's really easy to see the different partners. So you have France that has a huge amount of Africa. You have England or the UK, let's say, has quite a large part too. Germany, very little. And it's going to lose a lot after the First World War. Spain is having very little. It has part of Morocco, and then I think the other one, it's Mauritania. The British have, all that in there, Germany. And then you can see that Ethiopia remains free, so it will not be colonized, though it will, the Italians are going to try to take it. It didn't work, as well as what you see here, which is Liberia, that wasn't colonized either. And we're back to the modern Africa, as you can see nowadays. To understand Africa, we also have to look at the climate, because it's very much impacted by climate. So you see that the equator runs from Gabon to Uganda and Kenya. But you have that whole tropical region, including a good part of the Sahara Desert, as you can see. And when we talk typically of Africa, what we're going to mostly work on is the sub-Sahara countries, because this is unlivable almost. You have oases and small centers, but it's a very arid desert. And then you have now the tropical region with rain and so on, and takes a good part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Tanzania, Zambia, Angola, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and so on, and then at South Africa at the bottom. So here you have a definition. What you see, arid desert, very hot, it's the red, everything that you see in red. In blue, you have tropical savanna. And that thing that you might have heard when we talk about this is that kind of savanna, it's called the Sahel. And we talked a lot about the Sahel because it was at the time, I mean, there was terrible famine in that region. And but we typically were talking about the Sahel in this part of Africa, but in fact, it crosses the whole continent from left to right. And I think these are quite telling. Then you have the tropical part, which is very rich, and as we know, has a lot of underground too. So let's talk about the content. That was the big thing that I had to do, is decide on what I was going to talk about. And the selection was mine, but is in generally, when you look at works made, talking about African art, they are typically excluded. We talk about the Mediterranean littoral with Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and then Egypt. Egypt takes a whole course by itself because it has been so studied, and maybe one day I will do it, but right now it would be unfair to the rest if I was doing it. And the North is very interesting, but it saw the impact of the Phoenician first that were going through the Mediterranean. And by the way, all the way to Senegal, the Phoenicians did an incredible amount of traveling. And then you had, after that, you had the Greeks, you had Carthage, and then you had the Romans, and then Islam came. So you had the successions of cultures that really marked that whole littoral. And makes it extremely rich, but completely different to what our purpose is right now. The diversity, it is so diverse in the whole of Africa that it's impossible to link topics together. So you can't say, okay, I'm going to show you that sculpture and this relates to this. No, everything is very particular. The idiosyncratic technologies, very particular expressions, and the monuments, as you will see, are very different too. We have always the tendency as art historian to divide periods because it's easier to handle. And in fact, when you look at Africa, it's a lot more continuity that it is discrete periods. Connections, there are connections, and the connections are typically the caravans that crossed Africa. So these trading caravans that were going from west to east or east to west are the thing that made connection between some of these cultures, because they would take some of the goods made in some place and bring them to the other side. And so they were typically the big link, as the Silk Road in Asia all the way to Middle East, a lot of Asian culture to the Middle East and then to Europe, but on the reverse, going back to China, brought things that were made in the Middle East or in Europe. And then we have to face the foreign attitude to the past. Oh, something is wrong. What is happening? Let me see. Yes. Just anyway, the foreign attitude to the past, we have a lot of racial stereotyping, which means that, for example, we'll see that in the West, some digs brought out some extraordinary busts and heads that were sculpted or sometimes founded, in bronze. They were so beautiful that immediately their idea was, this must have been influenced by the Greek culture. It cannot be local. And so they now come back on these statements and say, no, this is absolutely genuinely from there, because they found many, and it's very much a local art. There is a lot of this stereotyping, and that has caused also a lot of damage because they had no respect for the culture. And so this is really sad, unfortunately. Archaeology, colonial archaeology, most of them were chance finds. So there were some people that were interested in a little place, they found it, but they never put it into context, which was a big problem and still is a big problem. But on the other hand, what you have, and it's mostly what we're going to talk about, is, for example, rescue work. Once it was decided to make the barrage in Egypt and create the Lake Nasser, they decided to really try to examine that whole region to make sure that they wouldn't flood important monuments. And doing so, suddenly that whole area was far more studied than anything had been studied in the South before. And so thanks to that rescue work, they were able to find things that we will see the same in the West and in Aksum also. So these were positive rescue works, if you want. The advances, as you know, once these countries were decolonized and were independent, you would hope that a lot of local people would really do some research. But the lack of means, the lack of budget was so bad that they couldn't, they didn't have at their disposal all the means to do this research. So there's been very little research done. And there are also few professionals, but it's also a question of, what can they live on? They already are struggling to survive in everyday life, that doing things that seems quite marginal and frivolous, like archaeology, seems to be in the back, on the back burner, but not as an essential way of surviving. There is also sometimes some problems between anthropologists and art historian. Art historian want so much, as I say, to make periods, make it so clear to people to understand that the anthropologists fight it because they're looking at another purpose in their research. And then we face terrible destructions and looting, particularly in Meroe, that whole northern part of Nubia. Actually, it's pretty central. They were incredible looting, and we'll talk about it once we see it. On the Kenya coast also, because of the succession of powers and the problems of religion. Religion there plays quite an important role, but the Portuguese came and destroyed things that had been done before because they were Catholics, so they were against the Muslim. And in Kenya, you had lots of mosques on the coast that were demolished thanks to them. Same thing in Mali. And then we have to look at the sheer, simple physical problem of the materials that are used. When you see the pyramids in Egypt, they're made of stone. This is very, very solid and can last forever. A lot of countries, and there's the same in the Middle East, in Mesopotamia, they had these marvelous pyramids, the ziggurats, but they were made of big bricks. And with the rain and the wind and so on, that kind of eroded them just to rubble. Same thing in many of these places, that some of the constructions were made with materials like big bricks. or wood, and there an enormous traffic of termites in Africa. And so the termites are very voracious, and anything made of wood has a chance to disappear because of it. One example of looting, for example, is the Stela of Axum that you see on the left at the Piazza di Porta Capena in Rome, when the fascist Italian went to Ethiopia, really tried to overwhelm Ethiopia, to kind of prove their goal. They took one of these great obelisks to Rome and erected it. And though it was decided since the late 20th century that it should have been returned, it's only in 2008 that it was finally returned and stands again in Ethiopia. So these extraordinary stelae. These were, we'll see some others, are normally grave markers. And you can see it because the picture is pretty good. It's shown, it's like a building. It shows fake doors and windows on it. So just to give you an idea of a building. So starting with Nubia, which is nowadays Sudan, and as you know, is at war right now and suffering terribly. You have here the dotted line that separates Egypt and Sudan, and here is the Lake Nasser with Abu Simbel, the famous temple that has been moved from the valley to a higher range so that it wouldn't be flooded by the lake. So Lake Nasser is really at the border of Sudan and Egypt. And you can see these lines, they show the first cataract, second cataract. That's often the way we divide the Nile River, and shows this happens between the third and the fourth cataract. So you have the second cataract, you have the third cataract, the fourth cataract here, the fifth cataract, and then you have all these tributaries that get together to make the Nile. You have the White Nile, the Blue Nile, and so on. Don't forget that the source of the Nile was only discovered very late and was always a mystery. So I circled the main places that we're going to see there, all on the Nile, and it makes sense. When you have all these civilizations and these cultures are going to flourish where there is water. Water is most important. So it's going to be either a lake or it's going to be a river or the sea. So a quick reminder of the chronology of Egypt, let's say, and the inference of Nubia in it. So the very first thing that we find is Mesolithic era in Northeast Africa starts around 10,000, which is much earlier than what you find in the Middle East or in Europe. When we talk about Mesolithic, it's really that transition period from hunters and gatherers to settlements where people start raising cattle and doing agriculture. Around 8,000 before Christ, BC, so before Common Era, you have the beginning of the desiccation of Sahara. And therefore, for all the population that are in that Sahara part that is now desiccating, they're moving to the Nile, which is the biggest river there on the east, to have access to water. 6,000 BCE Neolithic period, so this is when they settled and they start having towns and later on cities. You start having cultures, you start having a religion that becomes more and more formal. This is the new stone period. And we find the first unified kingdom founded by King Menes in 3150 BCE. from 2700 to 2200, we have what we call the Old Kingdom. The dynasties in Egypt are separate between Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom, with some intermediate periods where they were invaded by other population. And so we see here about that period between 2500 and 1500, we have the beginning of the Kerma culture in Nubia. Continuing, we have the New Kingdom from 1550 to 2070. And during that period about, you have Tutmosis that invaded Nubia in 1580. Then you have Seti and Ramses II, who are building the temple of Amun in Jebel Barkal. Also the building he built Abu Simbel, which is still in Egypt. And at that time, we know that Nubia adopted the Egyptian belief. So the whole system, hierarchy of gods and so on, and rituals. But in 1086 BCE, the Kushite kingdom that is part of the Kerma culture revives. And to everybody's surprise, it's quite interesting, the Kushites will occupy the throne of Egypt from 748 to 656. And this is the period with the Nubian pharaoh that you hear of. And then return of things in 591, one of the later Egyptian pharaoh will occupy Kush and will be at the origin of the Meroe pyramids. Just as a general thing, from in 525, the Achaemenid Persians began their conquest of Egypt. And then you have, of course, Alexander the Great, who does his huge conquest in the Middle East. He dies prematurely, and Ptolemy is his successor in Egypt, and starts the Ptolemaic dynasty from 305 to 30 BCE, the last one being Cleopatra, of course, which is part of the Ptolemaic dynasty. And then later in 24 BCE, the Romans come down to Nubia and invade Meroe. So we find some quite interesting things in Nubia. For example, that Napta calendar circle must be reminiscent to you of Stonehenge. And it has apparently more or less the same idea that it's calendar, so it marks when the sun strikes here and there and so on. Unfortunately, because it was left on its own in the middle of the desert, the people realized that some of the stones had been stolen and so on, so they replicated on the site the thing, and they transported the original stones at the Aswan Nubia Museum. They found also these early vessels, and some, as you can see there on the right, are really very pretty with these designs on it. So scallop decoration that were all found in museums. That was part of the burial rituals. So the Kerma culture in Nubia started in 2500 and lasted to the way to 1500, was considered very minor until they went on doing the digging, and then found quite an amazing city, as you can see there, with all the plans of different temples, of palaces, and other buildings. Quite that proved that actually that culture was quite advanced. They found some burials, and this is reconstruction of a burial. So they would have a tumulus, which seems to be general when you look at in the Nordic countries or in England or in the Middle East, is the same kind of thing. So but they had the ritual of the afterlife, setting the body there with important artifacts as well as food. So they had these jars with cereals and other things for the afterlife. And also, as you can see here, it's surrounded by skulls of large cattle. Some balls that to me are very reminiscent of Crete. When you look at some of these vessels in Crete, they're very similar. They're just the sea. These waves are what you see there, the squalls, the thermopole. On the other hand, you have that beautiful mirror here, end of the Thermopylae period, dating back to, and so it should be BCE, I didn't add it. So we talked about the temple of Amun in Jebel Barkal that was built by Tutmosis and Ramses II. And as you can see, it used to be quite a nice complex. With the reconstruction that you see here, you had the temple of Amun and then the secondary temple there and other places for the priests to live in and for the workers to keep on maintaining the place. As you can see, this is Jebel Barkal that became quite a religious center in Nubia at that time. It will have a continuation, so that people kept coming to worship the gods. But this is quite a sophisticated building, as you can see. This is so this is at the beginning, the 25th dynasty, which is the Nubian pharaohs. And this is one of the pyramids of the dating back of the 4th century BCE at El Kouroub. But you can see that the material, unfortunately, degrades much more because of the kind of material that is used. You don't have the stone that you have. In Nuri, we have, that's the second period, and Kuhu ran out of place. And so the pharaoh decided to move to Nuri, where you have, for example, the largest pyramid, which is 50-meter high. So it's 150 feet high. The Taharqa was one of the main pharaoh of the time. And you can see what is left of other pyramids around it, this one being the largest one. And in these pyramids and in the temples, you can find these extraordinary statues. This is 3.6 meter high on the left, statue of the King Taharqa that is now at the Jebel Barkal National Museum of Sudan. And to the right, the reconstruction of the same statue, but with coloring, the way it would have looked originally. So you had gold that was defining these arm bracelets and the wrists, and as well as the coif, all covered of gold. The 3.6 meter is over 10 feet high. So quite a spectacular representation of that very powerful pharaoh. And here is a whole series that is in the Kerma Museum of the dating back from 748 to 656 BCE, a whole series of these pharaohs. So it's really interesting when you see this, by the way, as you must have heard that there is a movie made by Netflix on Cleopatra, and extremely big dissension, I would say, between the Greek, the Egyptian, and the maker of the movie, because they represent Cleopatra as mixed blood. And for the Greek and the Egyptian, it's absolutely not true, because she was Greek. She was a descendant of Ptolemy. And there was kind of a racial barrier between the Greeks and the darker skinned people in Egypt. So quite interesting because their justification is, yeah, but they were Nubian kings that were Black. And so this makes sense that she would be mixed blood. So there's a big, big discussion. And this is, you look at this and you know, this is the roots of the whole discussion. The shrine of Taharqa in Tawa is one of the largest shrines that still exists from that culture. And absolutely beautiful, as you can see, the whole low relief and with Ammon and the different kings. And it is in the Ashmolean Museum. Little of the most beautiful pieces are still in Sudan. Within the tombs, these are some examples of what you can find. The Shawapti of King Taharqa. These are small statuettes that were accompanying always the deceased in the tombs. And then the beautiful jewelry found on the mummy of another king, here showing Isis with her wings open. The second kingdom of Kush in Napata, same thing. This actually, when you look at this, far more pyramids in Sudan than there is in Egypt. But you never heard of it. So I'm showing you this difference. This is the way they were found in 1821. And you can see nowadays, and what you see is the fact that all the entrances had been demolished so that they could go in and loot everything that was in it. Though there was looting that had been perpetrated prior to the colonizers. And finally, Meroe, which is one of the largest pyramid sites that is more recent, dates from 270 BCE to 350 CE. And this is where there's been tremendous looting. That was one of the first one that was found. And literally out of the, I think it's more than 80 pyramids that were there, more than half have been destroyed just for looting. And that was by an Italian archaeologist who took all these beautiful objects that he found and tried to, once back in his country, tried to sell them with difficulty because nobody would believe that such beautiful things were coming from there. And so finally, it was split between two museums, and I will tell you where from, because unfortunately, I'm talking to you ad libs. I've lost all my notes in the process right now. So I will give you the name of these museums. But that's the large. Meroe is one of the largest of these. And here you see the Apedamak temple in Naka. That's another of these words. And here is where you see the large silhouette of the god and the king facing one another, plus the Roman kiosk that you see here to your right. Also, and quite interesting, is the Faras Cathedral. This is one of the monuments that was found at what has become the Lake Nasser. So before the Lake Nasser was flooded, they really investigated, and to their surprise, they found this building, and you can see on the left what the eastern facade of the cathedral here. This is a cathedral that was built in the 10th century, the third on the site. And here is, fortunately, they made a model of its condition after they excavated and before it would be flooded. So it's underwater now, so you can't see it anymore. And this is the reconstruction on how it would have looked, which was a typical Byzantine monument. But what was most incredible were the frescoes that they found in the cathedral. That really suddenly made them realize how advanced that culture was. And so you have here, you can see it, you know, at the time it was discovered and here recovered. This is now in a museum, but quite interesting frescoes showing a nativity scene, typical of that period of time where the Virgin Mary would be reclined on a bed, and then you would be surrounded by angels. Normally there are wise women there that are taking care of Jesus, but here you see also all kind of people and horses, and then you see a king there even on the lower left. Also here, Saint Anne and a magus on horseback. So that was quite a surprise for them when they found this. So we're going to move to Ethiopia, but I wanted to show you this map, and you might be able to come in and look at it. It's quite interesting. It's part of a manuscript that was found about the purpose of the Eritrean Sea. And so showing the whole circuit of trade that existed in the first century between Greece and Italy and all the way to India. And so you can imagine how it impacted all these cities, because suddenly you had contacts with these other cultures. They would pick up what you can see there, and I have a second blow up map that's going to show you. So you can see the population are Berbers, so mountain people. And what they get in when they go here, for example, you have spices, cinnamon, and slaves. Wine and grain on the other side, frankincense in this region, wine, dates, and gold. So this was the goal of all this trading. But of course, caused also exchange in the culture. So we're going to move to Ethiopia, but before I do that, we're going to take a little break. I'm going to try to get my notes back because it helps. But I'm going to, we can put the light on. There is coffee and when you have a question already now, please ask. Are you amazed by what you saw? Yes. Isn't that incredible? When you see that number of pyramids there, and the way that they always worship, you know, all the pyramids around Cairo, and then you have a little bit below, you have far more pyramids there than you have in Egypt. All right. You're very welcome. Okay, how can I get my last slides back?
Do you want to like restart your
This one?
Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Just restart it and let's try to connect from this one so you will have your regular setup.
I didn't change see if you see it's
I know, yeah, it wants to be restarted. It seems like something is
okay, let's do that. See, because I'm all at
yeah.
And this is
It's
really
rusty.
cold.
Thank you
Top ice.
so much. Thank you. Okay, so let's do again. Summer.
Just need to restart the whole computer since we're on break.
Okay, let's see where I am.
In this class,
And then we'll try to connect to Zoom from here also.
No, you see, it doesn't project. So you want me to start the computer to,
How long is it break?
no, no.
You know how you use glass. So this. The coins.
Why did you do that? Never.
No.
It's the same.
I accessed on my computer using your password and it's normal. I don't know what's happening.
It's so bizarre. Because I have so many things I have to say, and then, you know, it's not always.
So the plan is now for you to join Zoom from here.
No. Zoom is there.
Okay.
So I just want to have my notes if I have the presented view. I don't have the presented view right.
Usually I have your notes in this one.
It does, no, they both, it's just the same thing.
Restart usually the best choice.
Yeah. And my camera doesn't work on that one phone. Okay, so let's see, get it. Because I don't even know how they can connect that way. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's why I say that's what I needed. So I want.
I'm so sad to see that they moved the stones.
I know.
Because the location is so.
Yeah.
You never know what they would find.
No, I wanted to, let me see, I want to see Nicole.
Okay, that's good.
Thank you so much.
Just always restart is a good way.
Yeah, no.
Can I have a cookie?
Oh, I have to. Oh no, it's this one that I want. That's it. Okay. Okay, so the artifacts are in the State Museum of Egyptian Art in Munich, as well as in Berlin. So they're the one that they split the treasure that the Italian guy found between Munich and Berlin. So I've recovered my notes. The cataracts.
Cataract.
They falls, the waterfalls.
Oh, waterfalls.
Yeah.
Okay.
But cataract is the proper word for the Nile. Yeah.
For falls, waterfalls.
Yes.
I never been.
Okay. Now I can talk about what I. So I don't know who is. So people, I appreciate your patience earlier, but we don't know what happened. So it's the mysteries of Zoom. So is it kind of clear the way I put it?
Yes.
Because it's really, it was so difficult to make sense of it. And even on the net, what I was finding was sometimes contradicting some other stuff. So I really had to go and do a lot of deep research. But books are non-existent. It's insane. Just incredible. So here, as you can see, you have Ethiopia, but there's a lot of dispute on some of the borders in Ethiopia, because again, religion is a big part of it. Ethiopia is mostly Christian. Eritrea is mostly Christian, though it's almost half who's Muslim, but Somalia is Muslim. And so there's that fight, and it's mostly religious, how can I say, triggered, religion triggered. It's really, that's where the negative side of religion comes in. So if you don't mind, we're gonna go on. Yeah, thank you. And close the door. Thank you, Steve. So just for you, so you can see Addis Ababa, which is the capital city, but it's in the north there that we have most of the main monuments. And as you can remark in this is another war that's seemed to have come down and is in the truce since the end of November last year, that's the Tigray region. And you heard a lot in the news how there were lots of fights. I mean, Ethiopia is in between two problems, because here they have population, they has these, what's the name again? These people that come in and have kidnapped girls and so on. You have that whole militias that come in the south, but that seemed to have quite down. And so they moved everything up north, because the Tigray region that is here started revolting. And so Ethiopia, but it seems to have calmed down a little bit. So we have interesting rock art. We have a lot of cave paintings and rock paintings all over Africa, and you'll see, I mean, we won't see because the biggest one in the north are in Algeria, and they're extraordinary, by the way. But we'll see some in South Africa that are quite remarkable too. So here, just an example, and I showed you the rock because this is where this is painted on. So you see that rock that looks very unstable to me. So I have a feeling it's going to fall, but has this extraordinary representation of cattle and people of all kinds. People here, people there, people there. But also, if you see some anthropomorphic stelae with carved face in southern Ethiopia, very interesting faces there. And also some rock that show cattle that is really in low relief. So you have all these bodies with the legs and so on, and hundreds of them on one big rock. So the first thing we'll talk about in Ethiopia is the Aksum Empire. It at the time extended across most of the present Eritrea, which is the northeast part at the border of Ethiopia, on the northeast between the sea and northern Ethiopia, western Yemen, and it invaded it utilizing the door designs of Egypt, so some particular boat, and part of Eastern Sudan. They had their own alphabets, the Ge'ez alpha syllabary, which later evolved to include vowels. In nearly 1700 years ago, giant obelisks in honor of emperors, as well as tombstones, were made, and we've seen already two, we'll see some more. Then you have the big moment for Ethiopia, that in 324, the king Ezana was converted by Frumentius, who was not only his slave, but also his tutor. And he converted him to Christianity. and was later on, Frumentius was 6 years later appointed Bishop of Ethiopia. And this is from that time on that Ethiopia becomes a very, very Christian country, but not in the Roman Catholic way. It's very quickly going to secede and become part of the Orthodox, the Eastern Orthodox, but still different than the North. It invaded Nubia in the mid-4th century, signaling the end of independent Nubia pagan kingdom. And it's presumably the place where the Ark of the Covenant is kept. And there's a whole different story that nobody can confirm, but we'll see the building in which it is kept. And then in 646, the Rashidun Caliphate took control of the Red Sea and Egypt and pushed Aksum into economic isolation. Aksum is this part, so you can see here that at the time it went all the way to Yemen and this part here. So it's in the northeastern part of Ethiopia nowadays. The stele are quite interesting. This is one example of Aksumite stele. Many of them, unfortunately, with the time fell down and broke down in pieces, but then were reconstructed. And this is quite interesting because it's a mix of what you can find sometimes in Persepolis, for example. That type of profile relief is very similar to what you can find there too. But I talked about the stele, and there is a place that's called the field, the field of stele, of these obelisks. This is the largest one, the obelisk of Aksum, and then the King Ezana stele. And you can see all these fake doors and windows that are there, making it supposedly a monument. It's multi-storied palace. They can measure up to 33 meters high, which makes it 100 feet high. But we find also in that region some ruins of palaces. This is the Dungur, dating back from the 7th century of our era, just the almost foundation, but would have looked pretty much this way. This was mentioned, and we have to realize Aksum was the capital city of the kingdom, and it was standing just across the road from where the stele were. Dungur is also known locally and popularly as the Palace of the Queen of Sheba. Now, when we talk about the Ethiopia and the church, we have to have a little word about it. Not that much, but just the name of it is Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. It's the largest of the Oriental Orthodox Church, originating before European colonization of the continent. Any other country in Africa that is Christian is post-colonial time. I mean, or colonial time and post-colonial time. This predates the colonies. It dates back to the acceptance of Christianity by the kingdom of Aksum in 330. It has between 36 million and, let's say, almost 50 million adherents in Ethiopia. Tewahedo means united as one, in the belief that in the one perfectly unified nature of Christ, complete union of the divine and human natures into one nature. I'm not going any further than that because it is so complicated that all these have variances in the way they believe in the natures of Christ, and it's belonging to God the Father too. So let's look at some of these churches. Sorry, this should have moved, but the interior of the Enda Kidana Mehat, very typically Ethiopian in shape. It has that kind of rectilinear, the square structure with decoration on the facade. and the other part. But what is quite interesting, you come in and you have that domes inside, beautifully decorated with very indigenous motifs that you find again in these processional crosses that you see all the time. Every time you have a religious procession in Ethiopia, you have all the priests with each of them with a processional cross. And these you can see are very much repeated in the crosses as well as in the paintings. The cross itself is early 15th century. And here's a view of the priest going into procession. Just to show you, this is a more contemporary monastery. Here's the monastery of Debre Damo. Very colorful, as you can see, within that majestic landscape. But we find, once we have monasteries, we find manuscripts. And there are some amazing manuscripts to be found. One on the left showing St. Mark from the Garima Gospel, dating back to the 6th century. And then the other one, the Holy Mother Mary. And here is the place, the Chapel of the Tablet, where supposedly the Ark of the Covenant is kept. It is in the town of Axum, very close to the grounds of the obelisk. It has been built during the reign of Ezana, so in the first Christian ruler during the 4th century AD, and then has been rebuilt several times since. Accordingly, and that's unfortunately the case, still women are not permitted entry into the old church due to the reservation of the Blessed Virgin Mary representing the archetype of the ark, is the only woman allowed within its premises. So nobody has ever seen the ark. The person who is in charge of the ark is there for life. Once they named the guardian of the ark, he cannot get out. He is there forever, and if he dies before naming a successor, the elders are going to name a successor to take care of it. But nobody has ever seen the ark, and of course, as you can imagine, there's a lot of doubt. It is supposed to have been brought up by the son of Queen Sheba from Jerusalem. And now I want to talk about the very special rock-hewn churches of Lalibela. And for that, I'm going to invite Joan to join me, and we're going to run it. When were you there? It's about 3 years ago?
I was there actually twice.
Yeah, why don't you come here if you don't mind? They will. So you can see them. So you went twice.
I was actually there in 2006 and again in 2016. And well, so when Ann asked me to talk about the experience and describe it, I said, well, that'll be hard because it's indescribable. It's a really very astounding experience to go to.
So this, you have a plan with the name of the different churches. There are 11 of them at different level of, how can you say, perfection in architecture, maybe. So the most known is number 1, the Diete Georgis. Is the way that they pronounce it there or not?
I think so. Beth from Diete.
I know it's Beth Diete or it's some, but the Georgis, I think, correct. St. George, in fact, the church, that's St. George. And then you have tunnels that link one to the others. There is the river there that is representing actually the Jordan River in the Middle East. So this is literally a reproduction of what Jerusalem meant to King Lalibela when he went to Jerusalem. He went there, but the city had been taken by Saladin. And so he came back and wanted to reproduce Jerusalem in his town. And so just before we go on with these, I want to show you the village. And so you have the village of Lalibela, which is a very small village, but typical in the mountains. It's beautiful, by the way, it really is.
Typical round houses there.
And so the first one, so you see it, the roof, what you see, these are literally carved into the stone. So it's not built, it's carved. So go ahead.
Well, I can comment on that because, you know, I had read about Lalibela, I had seen pictures of the St. George's Church. I had eaten at Lalibela restaurant in Tempe, like maybe some of you have, but nothing prepares you for seeing it. It was the first church that we saw in 2006, and our guide kind of was leading us, and we were walking across a field, and I was looking straight ahead, trying to see a church, the distance, but instead you arrive at a ledge. And you look down and there's this beautiful church that is 3 stories high, about 45 feet. And it was only then that I realized that these were really carved down from the surface of the earth, down 3 stories. And into, you know, I think first they carved a solid block of stone, and then the masons, you know, made the profile of the church and then hollowed out the inside to create chambers and passageways and stairways, and then it was all decorated. And it's just astounding because it's really hard to believe that this is how they made them. And I've described it to people, and you know, it's just hard to believe.
And I think the picture there shows you the level of the surface, you know, on top of the roof here on the right. And you see how beautifully it is, but it is a solid rock and carved out, if you want, and carved in. So imagine the work that was done in the 11th and 12th century. Some were a little earlier because they were believed to be palaces before they were turned into churches. But this one is the most beautiful. Actually, there's another one that's very nice too.
Well, they claim 24 years. I think it's in the imperial records.
Yes.
To do all 11 churches, but our guide told us the secret of doing this in 24 years. He
They
said,
were angels.
yes, while the emperor's masons and artisans were working during the day, angels would pitch in at night when everybody was asleep. So that's how they completed in 24 years is this is what's believed in Ethiopia.
We're looking at the top on the left.
Yes,
Above.
yeah,
And you can go in there with there.
yeah. So this is, you can stand right here and look down. Yeah.
What's the stone?
And then that's. Yeah.
It's volcanic rock, isn't it?
Yes, volcanic, it's kind of reddish as you can see with this kind of moldy.
So iron oxide. Yeah. So here's a view with all the pilgrims, because these attract an enormous amount of pilgrims that come for the Pentecost, which is a big celebration, and others.
Yes, so you can then go down. The churches, I think you said they're connected by pathways and tunnels. And the thing to remember is they're living churches. There are many worshipers there. There are people there, local people. And you can go in, not all of them, I think some of them are not yet, restored, but you go in and they're very dark and kind of damp and smoky because most of the light is from torches and candles. You're always met by an Orthodox priest in traditional robes, usually as a staff with one of those beautiful crosses that Anne showed you. And in fact, in one of the churches, actually it was in a cave church, because I think they came before the Rocky.
Yeah, and I'm showing them all.
Oh,
So we
good,
will-
yeah, you'll see.
And this
that.
is St. George, it's one of the frescoes that you can find inside. No, it's all, no. So this is the House of the Cross. That's another one, and you can see with the pictures of Mary and others inside, and you can see some priests and some local. Mhm.
Well, when you're down in there, yeah, and away, and the church is like, especially the Yorgos is dark, pretty dark. But the ceilings are high. I mean, they hollowed out these large rooms. And in fact, Dan will show us one where there are 5 aisles in the sanctuary. But yeah, they're not there are no big stained glass windows, let me put it that way, yeah.
So here you have a few clients, and then you have an idea of these type of very narrow aisles. And typically often a veil, because the altar will be hidden in St. George's. I understand that there's even a reproduction of the Ark of the Covenant hidden
Oh.
behind.
In one of
Hold
the
on, because
rock
I've
churches,
gone,
or one of the cave
I've gone
churches,
early, yeah.
the priest invited us to touch a 700-year-old Bible to get blessing from it, which
So
I just couldn't do.
Yeah.
You know, I couldn't touch a
this is,
700-year-old
I think, a good view, so you
Yeah.
can see how it's being, and some have more space around it than others. I'm going to show them separately, but I thought this was an interesting view.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the House of Mary, one of the most important for pilgrimage.
Mhm. That's where many people, you
Yeah.
see many, here we see a few tourists, but mostly you see local people. But especially here in the parts of Munich.
And then look at the motifs there, that's the wind. So that's not the swastika. It's the wind. And the 4 cardinal points. This is the other biggest one. The House of the Savior of the World. Imagine carving that. It's House of what you had in the 12th century, you know, they had metallic chisels and hammers, and then you see the kind of manuscripts and icons that you can find in it.
They're all different.
Yeah, and some are very minor and have suffered. The next one that we show has suffered from earthquakes and almost collapsed entirely. Some are smaller. So this one, you can see bricks in between. It's because it partly collapsed, and so they build it up to keep it into shape.
And some are attached on the back to the rock and the bottom, and there's one that's attached to the bottom and the top of the rock, but it's
You have
standing on all 4 sides.
the House of the Holy Bread. And then finally, I think that's the last one. Yeah. That's the House of Gabriel and Raphael. That probably was a palace because of the fortification. They believe it was a palace before it became a church. And they have different entrances with a bridge and so on. But I think the feeling, and I'm going to give you, we run out of time with what happened at the beginning, but there is the Zamani project. I will give you the link and try to go into it and find a way, because you really have to be careful. There are 3 maps, so you can choose click on either of the maps, and it will give you a chance to go into the churches. that where you just have to play with the mouse or the scratch pad and turn it around. It's quite wonderful. But I was hoping to be able to show it to you, but we won't have enough time for it. So when you came out of that, Joan, what does it make you feel as far as the faith of these people?
Oh, well, while you're there, I just felt this very palpable sense of happiness. The people there, because people were worshiping, celebrating, socializing, communicating a little with us tourists, and you have to think there's a lot of pride in this.
Oh, it must be.
feat,
Yeah.
this marble. And so yeah, it's a wonderful place, and there's a feeling that people really are very religious. And you can see that in other
Joan
sites.
brought us an album that you will be able to look at after the presentation. Thank
Yeah.
you so much,
You're
Joan.
welcome. My pleasure.
I'm showing another church, actually. I will show another that you sent me pictures of. But this is another church, the Debre Selassie Church. Sorry, here it is. It means Trinity and Mountain of Light. It's the most famous place of worship in Gondar, so in the north. The interior is quite interesting. Again, you have the front entrance where men can go in, but you have the side entrance where only women can go through. Yeah, but look at the interior. It's quite wonderful. Frescoes showing Christ, and then you have the three, the God the Father, the Christ, and the Holy Spirit. But the typical curtain that hide the altar to people. So you have the two thieves and Mary and John. And then look at the ceiling. So the same cherubs that are on the architrave of the doors are in the ceiling looking at you intensely, almost stern, I would say. They don't look so friendly. And then you have other places. So everywhere it's frescoes, and including the representation of the devil. What he's expecting us if we don't behave. You can see there he's hung. That must be one of the legends. And then St. George and the dragon. So quite incredible place.
They're all painted.
Yeah, it's all frescoes. And then beside that, we have also some later, but that dates back to the 17th century. That's the fortress located in Gondar, where that was founded by Emperor Fasilides and was the home of the Ethiopian emperors at that time. It has a whole complex of buildings around it. So very quickly, we're going to conclude with a little, because I couldn't find much about it, but I wanted to emphasize also, we saw the trading in the first century. We know the trade once the beginning of Islam, that it's they're going to come down mostly along the coast, not within the country itself. The caravans were going either north of the Sahara or south of the Sahara, but from east to west. But what we have to look at too is we have other countries, and the Portuguese in the age of exploration, the 16th century, did a lot. And what you see in purple there are all the contacts that you have with the Portuguese around Africa and around India and the islands, where they established all kinds of trading posts. So very important influence, because they came, and in places where you had mostly a Muslim culture, they often demolished that to try to bring in Christianity. And so you can see how this is about where Kenya is, this is Lady Victoria, And so you have the whole on their way to India was quite impacted by the Portuguese. Then came the Dutch after that, but they didn't go as high. They came around, but then went straight to India, and so didn't impact as much that eastern coast of Africa. So a little map of Kenya, just also to show the valley of the Grand Rift, where all the studies have been done with Homo habilis and Homo sapiens sapiens, where they found all these early ancestors of Earth. Ours is one of the great places where they found these in Western Kenya. And of course, but mostly what you find, what we will see is in Lamu, is that little estuary of the river that used to be there, little islands, and we'll see some buildings that were there. Kenya, again, was mostly Muslim, and then the Portuguese came and destroyed a lot of the beauty that were there. So I'm showing you quickly. This is, for example, Mosque Wall, Atakwa, and the Mihrab. That used to be the place where the Imam would talk from, but that was demolished. And so we don't have much monuments, if you want, left in Kenya, though nature is the monument in Kenya, definitely. But I found something that is interesting is the Makonde art. And Makonde art is an ethnic group in Southeast Tanzania, so south of there, and northern Mozambique, but also is influencing the southern part of Kenya. They developed their culture in the plateau in Mozambique. They speak Makonde. It's a Bantu language, and we'll talk a lot more about the Bantus later on because they were very influential. They migrated quite a bit from the west to the east. It's what is interesting. It was traditionally a matrilineal society where children and inheritances belonged to women, and husbands move into the village of their wives. How wise. At present, they live throughout Tanzania, Mozambique, and in Kenya. They resisted predation by African, Arab, and European slavers, and they didn't fall under colonial power until the 1920s. It is in the 60s that the revolution that drove the Portuguese out of Mozambique was launched from the Makonde homeland of the Moeda Plateau. And they're known for their wood carving. And I want to show you because they're really interesting wood carving. Mostly what we find is the Mapiko mask. And these masks are worn not on the face, but as helmets that come down below the eyes. And so they can look through the mouths to see what's happening. And these are used for the coming of age rituals. We're already doing that before the missionaries came. They carve in a single block of wood and represent spirits, ancestors, and living characters, real or idealized. The dancers wears them so that he sees through the mouth and he faces straight when he bends forward. And you can see two figures down there on the left wearing these masks. Now, the female body mask is once they talk about the woman coming of age, women were not supposed to be dancing in front of people. So it's men that wear masks and then put these body masks on them to represent women. And as you can see, you have all kinds of tattoos, the scarification that are very typical of them. Other Makonde art is the Shetani. These were very abstract figures, mostly spirits. They play a very special role. They're neither human nor animal. They occur in 5 forms: human, mammal, fish, bird, and reptile. The Shetanis are believed to be still around, though the artist never actually saw any, but they claim that their parents and teachers had seen some. They were done before, again, the arrival of the colonizers, but are still done nowadays, and it has become quite an important form of art in the Makonde regions. They actually so powerful for them that sometimes you have panics that have occurred because of the arrival of these Shaitanis, and so they believed in these Shaitanis. So they had big panics in 1995 in Zanzibar and in Dar es Salaam. And then also quite interesting, this tree of life that represents a whole family. And so you have all members of the family doing different things. And then you have the topic, this is the same piece that is turned around. So you can see the different phases of it. But again, things that were done before and are still made nowadays. You can probably, compare them to the totem that you find in Northwest America, where you have that succession of family members and important figures. So this is what we've done about East Africa. And on the July 18th, we'll talk about the West Africa, which is also quite interesting and very diverse. So thank you for being so patient. If you could put the light on.